ready to begin. Welcome all to this discussion on the two KGF documentaries, as I call them. We're very happy to have Professor Janaki Nair and Basav Biradar. Before I go on to introduce the two speakers, just to give a little bit of a background to Talking Films Online, we began last June. And every week on Saturday, we meet to discuss a pre assigned film. Generally, we have a speaker whom we invite who suggests the film for the week and also initiates the discussion. So that is how this film came to be. I asked Basav to be there and to suggest a film. Nandini is in a storm. Yeah, so I asked Basav, and he suggested that we could watch his documentary. Along with his documentary, I remembered that there was this wonderful film by Janaki Nair, which I remember, I think, when it was screened in CSCS Bangalore. So I kind of took an off chance and mailed Janaki asking her if she could be present for the discussion today, and she agreed. She says that she can be with us for a while, maybe for about an hour. So, without much ado, I'll introduce Janaki, and then maybe she can talk a little bit about the film and how it came to be before we go on to discuss and talk about Basav's film. Janaki Nair has just retired as Professor of History from JNU, where she was teaching since 2009. Prior to that, she was Professor at CSSS Calcutta, Visiting Fellow at Isaac Bangalore, Visiting Fellow at CSCS Bangalore, and also a Fellow at MIDS Madras. Her research interests are social, political, and cultural history of Mysore and Karnataka, legal history, urban history, feminism, and visual culture. She's received a number of awards and fellowships, such as New India Foundation Book Prize in 2005 for The Promise of the Metropolis, Bangalore's 20th Century, the Prince Claus Fund Fellowship, the Netherlands in 2002, Cephas Fellowship of the Netherlands 1998 to 2000, John Savile Award UK 1997 to make the film, the film that we are discussing today, After the Gold. And she was also postdoctoral fellow at Pembroke Center, Brown University 1993 to 94. Besides a host of articles, I think all of us have read, many of these articles in important journals and as book chapters. She has co-edited with Mary John A Question of Silent Sexual Economies of India, and with Anjan Ghosh and Taupati Guha Thakurta, Theorizing the Present, Essays for Partha Chatterjee. She has authored the books Mysore Modern, Reconceptualizing the Region under Princely Mysore, 2012, The Promise of the Metropolis, Bangalore's 20th Century, 2005, and Miners and Mill Hands, Work, Culture and Politics in Princely Mysore, 1998, and Women and Law in Colonial India, A Social History, 1996. A very warm welcome on this late evening forum, Janaki. We really look forward to your revisiting a film that I think now is almost over a decade, more than a decade old. So, how does it feel revisiting this film and talking about it to us? Welcome, and over to you.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
I first want to start by saying a very big thank you to Nikhila for thinking of me after all these years. I should correct you, Nikhila. It is 24 years old, this film. It was made in 1997. And I have to say also a very big thank you to someone who is not present, and that is somebody called Nachi from the Potato Eaters Collective, who has given a new life to this film, I should say, because he has put it on YouTube. And I think it has seen more viewers on YouTube than it saw in all the time when I was carrying it around the country, trying to show it to people in those days when it wasn't possible to really show it in any other way. So, first of all, thank you. I'm also happy to see that I'm among some friends, some names I can recognize. Professor Iramat, very happy, namaskara, seeing you here after some days. And of course, Vijay Borati, I don't recognize many of the other names, but I'm delighted that you have this forum, which actually is focusing on documentary films. And I hope at some point I can join you once in a way for these discussions. Um, so let me start by saying just a few things which might interest you by way of the background to this film. As Nikhila's very generous introduction said, I have been working on various aspects of Karnataka history, and in fact, working on the labor history was one of my earliest interests. My dissertation was on Bangalore, and then I chanced upon this big file on a strike in KGF in 1930, and that's what led me in the direction of doing research on KGF as well. But it was not till very much later that I felt I would like to make a film, and that was because I saw this award which was announced. I decided to apply for it on an off chance. I had no experience of filmmaking. I should say this, unlike Basav, who has some experience with filmmaking. I cannot claim any such experience, and in fact, that was the first and the last film I made. I hope at some point I can do something more. But I was interested since there are academics in this group, I started out thinking about this film as something that would visualize what I had already done research on. So, in some ways, I went to KGF after having done research on KGF for so many years. And what I imagined that the film would do was to simply, make visible this long period of research that I had. And I would get people there to, in some ways, ventriloquize what I already knew. All this didn't work because when we went there, which was 1997, people were very anxious and concerned about the possible closure of the mines. That was uppermost in their mind. And it comes out in every interview that they were most anxious about the closure, the impending closure. They were least interested in remembering their past. And their remembrance of their past was also very different from what I had uncovered in archival materials. So it was a learning experience for me because I had to go along with what the mood of the people there was. They only wanted to speak about the closure. They only wanted to see me as a possible conduit to a state which would bail them out of this dilemma, this 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 situation which they faced of possible possibly losing their jobs and having to survive on next to nothing. So that was upmost in their minds, and I had to go along with that. The other thing that I had to do was a bit of subterfuge because I had to, of course, get permission from the BGML managing body, not the body, but the management, to be able to undertake the filming in this area. And that meant that I had to spend hours filming interviews with the management, of which you see a very, very, very tiny part. So out of maybe 16 hours of live footage from which I've taken this 1 hour film, maybe close to 9 hours was just on interviews with the management. And that was a necessary price we had to pay for the permission to be able to make this film. I don't think the management was terribly pleased with the outcome, because they expected that we would talk all about how beautifully everything was being managed. I really was very interested in focusing on workers. I was very lucky because I had my contacts whom I had been in touch with for my book, and who were my good friends in the area, the old men whom you see throughout the film, in and out, in and out. Um, they were very, very hospitable, and they were also very, very forthcoming. But having said that, I should also mention two or three things, and then I think I'll open it up for your responses. So, the one thing that was interesting about what they were talking about was many of them were members of the Communist Party. Many of them felt what I would call a certain kind of revolutionary vigilance about not admitting things they may have done, which was not necessarily, very good. For example, I'll give you an example. I knew from the records that workers, when they went underground, they were actually trying to save up on the candles that they had to use for light underground, so that they could use those candles in their own home. So, of course, it was very risky and dangerous to be in that darkness and to be mining in that darkness. But that was the kind of thing that they did not want to talk about, because they felt that it was somewhat shameful. So you constantly encountered this gap between what you knew in the records and what people were willing to actually talk about. But let me just say two or three things about the filmmaking process itself, because as I said, it was a completely new learning experience for me. First of all, I was extremely fortunate to have this very talented camera person, Ramani, R.V. Ramani, whom many of you may know. He is an extremely well-known documentary filmmaker. But at that time, we had a slight sort of, I mean, I left a lot to him, and I have to say that he had his own eccentricities. So he did not want to make my little dream come true, which was to, visualize what I already knew. He had his own ideas, and his particular interest and skill was on doing very tight close-ups of people's faces. He did that beautifully. You can see that in the film. But the other thing he suggested, and I'm really grateful to him for that suggestion, was that we try to use the darkness, and we try to portray the darkness and the conditions under which people worked. So he said, let's not use any extra light. Let us only use the headlamp, which is the light which workers use when they're working underground, so that we get a sense of that darkness, we get a sense of that space and how it is negotiated with just that little light. So we did not use any extra light underground. The entire shooting was done only with the light from headlamps. That's why there's a lot of darkness. Secondly, there was also it was also a moment, as I told you, that the mines were actually about to close. So we were probably among the last people to be allowed to film underground, uh, because the mines were rapidly being flooded. If you don't keep pumping out the water, the mines get flooded. And so we were probably the last to actually be able to film the underground. And again, I'm extremely grateful to the company for allowing me this opportunity. Thirdly, the afterlife of the film. So I took the film back to KGF. I just want to say two or three things about that. I took the film back to KGF mainly to show my friends, the old men whom I knew, and also to show other small groups. And it was days before, these technologies which allow you to show the films more widely. And so I had to take the film physically, put it in a video player, show it to a small group in a small room. My friends, especially Devanbu, were very disappointed that he only appears for actually he appears quite a lot, but he felt, oh, well, you talked to me for close to an hour and I'm only showing for like a few minutes. But in any case, they were happy to see the whole film. And there were two, three things about that were really quite unexpected and were very nice for me. Um, so there was a cable operator in the region, and he decided to actually show the film on cable in the entire area. So that was nice for me, because then I didn't need to take the film from, small house to small house. The second thing was that I learned that women had never been allowed to go underground. And therefore, for the women of that area, it was the first time they were seeing images of where their men actually worked. So that was quite a revelation to me. And I felt kind of pleased that I was able to do this, or give them, as it were, a sense of the conditions under which their men worked. Lastly, I just want to say one word about a rather accidental way in which the film developed. First of all, I should also thank my very good friend and editor, Shikha Sen, who went through this film. Even though she knows no Tamil at all, she was able to edit the film most intelligently. Um, it was completely serendipitous that the film begins underground with men who are the paid workforce of the BGML. They're the organized workforce, not organized only in terms of the kind of work they did, but also in terms of the kinds of organizations to which they belonged. Many of them belonged to left wing trade unions. And the film ends on the surface. It ends in the open. It ends with the work of women who are doing panning, and it ends with this informal labor of women. And that was completely, I should say, unexpected. I came to see this only when I started seeing the entire film over and over again. So this was for me a very nice way in which the film began and ended. It was not, as I say, planned. It happened, and that was one of the pleasures of this whole process. One last word about the fate of the film. So I went around the country showing the film. I showed it wherever it was possible and necessary, in a few places, physically taking the film to show it. I had one disastrous time in Trivandrum, where the video player would not work, the TV would not work, etc. But that apart, that was how I took it around. And what I was told by people who watched the film, which was admired and appreciated by people who were academics, in the initial stages, I was told, this is not a filmmaker's film. It's very much something that is an academic's film. And of course, it is true that the people who appreciated it were all academics. Filmmakers didn't show that much interest in the film. So I should say that, again, to end on the note which I began, that Nachi's interest in the film as a filmmaker was for me a very gratifying thing. He came to me saying that he had really liked the film, and that's why he wanted to show it on his Potato Eaters Collective. And I have to say that I was very, very gratified, because all along I had imagined that somewhere I missed that slot. I missed it being a filmmaker's film. I felt it was much more of a pedagogical film, in a sense, telling you about some aspects of the history of KGF. But with that, I'll stop, and maybe you can tell me what you thought of the film as well.
Thank you so much for taking us through the career of the film. The film is now open for discussion. I think we'll first discuss Janaki's film, since she can be with us only for a short while.
Uh,
So
I'm just wondering, should you talk about Basav's film too, and then we can
Okay,
talk more.
if you think that you can be with us for a little while longer, then I'll also introduce Basav, and uh,
I I
he
think
can present
I
as well.
think it would be nicer. I don't know what Basav feels.
I'm okay with either, whatever is suitable to you. All.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think Professor Nikhila is stuck. network. It was actually, I just remembered that when Nachi started Potato Eaters Collective, and last year sometime during the lockdown is when they started it. And I remember talking about, he had seen my film and he wanted to put my film. I said, no, put Professor Janki's first because nobody has seen it. Because my film anyways was already there in some one version of it on YouTube. So I told him, why don't you take Professor Janki's film, because it wasn't available. I remember how I got your film through a struggle. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, there was
Sure.
some problem with the connection.
Sure.
I'm now back. Let me also then introduce Basav. Basav Biradar is a writer and documentary filmmaker based in Bengaluru. He teaches courses on Indian cinema and modern Indian theatre at Azim Premji University. His film Before the Third Bell was selected for the Segal Center Film Festival on Art in New York in 2018. Occasionally, he also works in theatre as a playwright, director, and as a dramaturg. In 2018, he was awarded a grant by the Gayate Institute, Bangalore, to adapt, direct, and produce a German play into Kannada. Welcome, Basav, and thanks so much for asking us to watch your film, and thanks for being part of this discussion. Would you like to talk a little bit about your film before we open out both the films for discussion?
Yes. First of all, thank you, Professor Nikhila and the group for hosting these films on KGF. One of the things since I made this film, one of the rather amusing problem I have is everybody, the moment you say I made a film on KGF, they say, oh, the Yash film, because that has been trending. Even in my own family, they ask, oh, you were part of KGF, we never saw you, kind of thing. So because only the Yash mainstream film by Yash is quite popular, although it doesn't have anything to do with KGF itself. I mean, the two, very briefly about my film, I think one of the things which happened again serendipitously is that I was kind of researching modern Mysore and its history for some other work. And of course, I came across Professor Janki's book, Miners and Mill Hands of Mysore from the colonial time. And that got me interested. And also, I had never visited KGF. So I had always, we had read in textbook, etc. And the name itself is sort of intriguing in terms of Kolar goldfields, etc. So I thought, why not just go and try and visit first. Even while I was reading Professor Janki's book, I thought, why not go and visit? So I went for a visit actually with my father-in-law once, and for a day's visit. And I think that was quite revealing in the sense that I had never imagined how visually impactful is like an abandoned industrial town. I had seen photographs by filmmakers like David Lynch, who is he's also a well-known film photographer who photographs abandoned industrial cities. So I had seen his photographs, but I had thought it's staged and all that. But when I visited KGF, I was really struck by the imagery of not only KGF, the old waterworks, and and it's everything is almost like it's untouched since 100 years, whatever, right? So that nothing new has happened apart from that small Robertson Pate town. If you forget, the whole mining area is still sort of, so that visually really hit me hard. Then first I went and wrote an article for Outlook on, just like a travel essay on why KGF visit is interesting. And then I started thinking about industrial heritage with a couple of friends. And then at the same time, Sahapedia had approached me saying that, we want to, do something with Karnataka, some aspect of Karnataka socio-cultural history. Would you be interested to do something for us? And then I said, look, I'm sort of researching this and I'm quite interested. if you're so it kind of worked out. So they were interested in producing this film. So that's how the film came about. And I think as a filmmaker, my point of view was to just try and create a portrait of the town. I wasn't so because I felt that by that time I had also reached out to Professor Janaki and watched her film, etc. So thought that she had covered a lot of aspects in detail. So it was actually, then I thought, what should I do with my film? So the idea was to just kind of create a visual portrait of the town and its history through some of the people whom I met and sort of got involved with and made friends with during the research, right? So and we were a small crew, one cameraman, I only did the sound. So we were just two people going around KGF and filming for many days. We even stayed in some of the only good hotel which is there in KGF, and it was quite a great experience. And yeah, so that's it, I think, about the film. Yeah. And thanks to Professor Janki, because she agreed to lend some of her footage, because we filmed it in 2019 October or November, and at that time the mines are already closed, so we couldn't have shot inside of the mine. So I decided that we could borrow Professor Janki's footage, and she was very generously allowed me to use it. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Basav, for taking us through your journey to KGF and also the intertextual, the other KGF, which I think has created a lot of buzz with its part one and part two.
Yeah, and very interestingly, immediately I think a couple of newspapers wrote about my film, and you know, and that kind of was surprising. So I realized that the like Professor Janki was also saying, the time today, if you make a film, it's visible to people. Unlike back when Professor Janki made it. So it's so for her it was hard to get the film out, but for me, like, it has been quite easy that way. Hindu wrote about it, then I think Indian Express wrote about it. So then there were more people. And there are a couple of such discussions also happened. Even Bangalore International Center invited me to talk about it. So it kind of things happened, conversations happened much more easily for me. So I was luckier that way. Yeah. Although I borrowed quite a bit from her work. So,
Okay, both the films now are open for discussion. Does anyone want to begin? Any response? Yeah, while people kind of take their time to gather their thoughts, Basa, one of the interesting aspects of your film was the use of so many kind of still stationary. Almost it looks like they are still images, but obviously it's a very still camera that you're using. So the juxtaposition of so many still shots to tell this story, particularly of the outside. And then I must also say that I watched your film after watching Janaki's, and the sense of closeness, proximity with the subjects who are being interviewed there. I mean, like the camera is virtually in their face in Janaki's film, and also the emphasis, Janaki, in your film is inside the mines and the dark interiors. And even when the people are being interviewed, we don't get a sense so much of the space as much as how much they come alive as subjects. So visually, I thought, though the subject was very similar, the sense of the place that I got from both the films was very different. Another aspect which was striking to me watching Janaki's film is also about how far we have come. in terms of what is possible, what can laborers and workers coming together do, what is their negotiating power, or at least what was their negotiating power to some extent. Janaki's film documents that to the present, where it just seems like we're in a different world altogether. So these were some of the interesting and striking aspects of the films for me. Um, yeah, would anyone want to respond? Basav or Janaki, would you want to respond, or we wait for others?
Basav?
Yeah, Tarakeshwar,
Yeah,
please go ahead.
yeah.
You're unmuted.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank both the filmmakers here. So I watched it from an academic perspective, I wouldn't be able to comment on the cinematic aspects of the two films. I will leave it to others. So what was striking to me was what has happened in the last 2 decades. So when Janaki film came, as she was saying, the closure was looming large on their head, and they spoke about it, and that has come out very well in the film. And in Basav film, there is some kind of a glimmer of hope that it might be reopened. So the entire talk was around that, and also there was some kind of nostalgia about the past. So in that sense, it gave us a perspective about what is happening to KGF in uh, the last couple of decades. It was also a kind of contrast to uh, the visibility of KGF through the mainstream Yash film. So the Yash film portrays KGF and the mining in a particular way. And then from that, if you come to these two documentaries give us a different perspective over the last 2 decades. So in that sense, I thought it's quite interesting. And in Janki's film, what I thought was the question of labor was more prominent. Uh, it was more academic, I thought. So, as if she was interviewing them for her book, though the book came much earlier. So, it sounded like that. And though there was as she said, there's a question of gender to it, and the woman working at the end, and then that was quite interesting. In Basav film, it was more a kind of nostalgia, though there was labor. One is a glimmer of hope and the nostalgia. And in Basav film, the added thing was the perspective of the non-labor BGML staff. So especially the Anglo-Indians. So their interviews. So that perspective, the way they portrayed the past and the other class which tried to portray the past, that contrast I think came out very well there. So that's what I think I got from these two films. So I thank uh, both Janaki and Basav for these two films.
Yeah, thank you for your feedback. Yeah, yeah.
May I, Nikita?
Yeah, go ahead.
A few stray thoughts about both the documentaries. Um, I was uh, I was trying to compare both the documentaries. At the same time, I was also trying to compare Janki's articles which appeared in EPW and other articles which appeared in EPW, like Revati and the other article which your Janki's documentary acknowledges at the end of the documentary. And what is highlighted in Revati and Nandkumar, am I right?
Vinod.
Vinod, yeah. Vinod and Revati's article, which focuses on a division of classes. I mean, how the classes were seen by them in the KGF mining site, and their article focuses on that. Before watching Janki's documentary, I thought that that would be the focus of Janki's documentary, but it's a different one. The point which is focused by Revati and Vinod is very marginally, but very importantly, highlighted by Basav's documentary, wherein we see the recollections of Anglo-Indian lady, how they were located in some quarters and how the laborers were placed in the same mining site. So that was one point that I highlighted. I mean, I observed. And secondly, in the light of what was happening in the 1990s, I'm sure Janaki's concentration on the question of labor in the documentary is quite well taken. Perhaps her research also, as she has admitted, her research on the mining and the laborers might have definitely made her focus heavily on the laborers. Focusing on labor and the perspective of labor union and others. Thirdly, this is something that I have been thinking about film reviews, documentary reviews. I am always puzzled by a methodological question, whether to do a content analysis or textual analysis of documentary or a film or not. Because Janaki's narration of her experiences as a documentary maker, at the end of her narration, she speaks about how it was a collective endeavor of making a documentary. So I was thinking whether when we analyze this documentary made by Basav or Janaki, should we confine ourselves to textual analysis of documentary, or should also focus on cameraman and editor as well as the filmmaker? That question has always bothered me. Perhaps both the filmmakers, documentary makers can throw some light on this. And I think I will speak later when I gather more points about what I want to say. I'll just end here for the time being.
Thanks, Vijay. Basav or Janaki, would you like to respond at this point?
Yeah, go ahead, Janaki.
No, you use first.
Okay, thank you. I think, thank you for all the feedback, Mr. Tarkeshwar and Mr. Vijay. I think, the visual montage, just to refer back to what Professor Nikhila said, I was very interested in because I wanted to kind of capture it the way I saw it, the huge equipment lying around with no people to be seen for kilometers, and very occasionally one vehicle will pass by. So the kind of sense I got of the place when I went there, I wanted to recreate that in the edit room as well, because I edited the film myself, and I wanted to sort of recreate that effect. So the visual montage is something I really liked. So in fact, it was earlier about first 10 minutes was just visual montage. Then I had to sort of tailor it down. But I thought that kind of set the context for the film for me, because then we are all transported there, and then the whole particular histories kind of come out. And to answer Mr. Vijay's question, I think it's a great question. I do write film criticism occasionally for magazines, etc. So I think it's a tough one as well in terms of documentaries, but as a filmmaker myself, I would say that, all the work put out there, whether it's the cinematography or the editing or the textual voiceover, whatever, everything is for criticism, right? So it should be, I think we should look at those aspects as well, if it is adding to the film or not, if it is being more instructive, if it is being more, so those kind of, that is my opinion on that. And my focus, just to reveal a little bit, because we spoke of nostalgia evoked by the film. My idea was to sort of, because I found that it's just not the mining history which is there. It's also these little cultural histories of religion, class. So all these particular histories, and these Anglo-Indian history of also is there, community history. So I thought all these are very particular histories. So I couldn't convince myself to just focus on one and sort of created a small portrait of all particular histories. So that was the idea. Of course, some of it is still not there, like the whole Tamil language struggle, which we had done many interviews of people around how the Tamil Sangam worked there for language rights to study in Tamil in Karnataka after the whole VK Gokak movement, etc., etc. Yeah. So yeah, Professor Janaki, over to you for this.
Let me start by saying I'm overwhelmed because I should start by saying thank you to all of you for watching the film with such interest and with such keenness that you've been able to raise questions that I have both thought about and not thought about. So let me start also by saying thank you to Basav for the role that he played in making my film more widely available by introducing Nachi to it. If I can take these questions raised by Nikhila, Tarakeshwar, Vijay in turn. Nikhila, to answer your question, I think I mentioned this, but perhaps only in passing, that Ramani's focus and talent was in terms of getting these portraits of faces, and that was his real gift, I should say, because he really was very keen on getting that very tight kind of close up of faces. And it's only when I started looking at the footage later that I realized how wonderful it was. Again, we used very low lighting. We did not use very sort of high lighting for those faces, those portraits. The flip side was that he was not interested in context in terms of, wanting to give you the bigger picture. So, for instance, I wanted the element which to me is a very dominant element of the KGF landscape, which are the cyanide heaps. They surround the area. They are the detritus of mining. They are in some ways a part of a new landscape. And to me, they were very, very important. He was simply not interested in filming those cyanide dumps. He did not want these slow pan from left to right and so on and so forth. He did not like that kind of filming. And to me, that was very disappointing because I felt, this is too important an element of the landscape to be left out. How do we get that in? And finally, the only place when they come in is, as you saw in the film, through the railway train's window. It's through when we were traveling in the train and through what you could see of the cyanide dumps through the window was the only time when we got that, because he kind of felt excited of this moving train and so on and so forth. So there was that little bit of that tension. And so I'm coming now to, before I come to Tarakeshwar, I'm coming back to Vijay's question about the tension between content and visualizing. So I was, of course, the person who had all the content, and I knew everything. And I should mention here, and if you are interested, we can discuss this a bit more, that one of the interesting things about going back as a historian who knew all this material and knew all the periods and the history and the dates and the details and so on and so forth, was that local people at that time especially were not particularly interested in that history. They were indifferent, I would say, to that history. And it was very hard for me to get them to be interested enough to say something about that history. As I said, their preoccupation was with closure, so they were not necessarily interested in this whole. What was interesting for me was that the footage, that is to say the visuals, suggested other kinds of ways of bringing about that history. So one had to be a little creative with the footage, which was always a little different from what you imagined you would be taking. And you had to work with that. As you know, my narrative begins rather late. It begins 20 minutes into the film. I allowed the visuals to dominate in the first 20 minutes. So it is a bit unorthodox in that sense. There was this big question about how much of myself should be in the film and how much should not. I did the narration myself, and it was decided that we'd have this 20 minutes of visuals, then you'd have the voiceover, which brings in a bit of this history and so on. And then again, another 20 minutes where you're basically listening and talking to people and not hearing so much of the voiceover. So there was a very creative, I would say it was a very creative tension between the visual and the element of content. There was a very creative tension. I think a very productive tension as a consequence, because I think the film finally kind of hands together because of that tension. To go back to Tarkeshwar's question, you're quite right. My interest and my focus, and in fact, the grant and the award that I applied for and got was very specifically one that was interested in labor and trade union history. So that was my focus, definitely. And I think it shows. As I said, the small price that I had to pay for being able to reach that labor history was to take hours and hours of interviews with the management, which of course, in the filmmaking, I could happily jettison. But yes, it was very much, at least for me, very much focused on labor. Having said that, there were many other elements which kind of came up, and that has come up in my book as well, to do with questions of religion, to do with questions of culture in the area, and to do with also the setting and the fact that it had this kind of what the Anglo-Indians describe as this little England. It had that an element of that kind of recreation of a very quiet, serene, and extremely sort of laid-back place with billiards and golf and so on and so forth, which is also part of that location. So I felt it wasn't correct to leave that out. But the central focus for me, at least, was definitely labor and their struggles and their predicaments, and of course the predicament at which when we filmed, which was definitely trying to understand closure. Yeah, so those are some of the things I wanted to say. There were aspects of the life on the mines that we filmed, and I felt I simply could not use. I'll give you one example. I was told that the most dramatic thing that happens is on payday, when they all get paid. So you saw them actually counting their money and so on. There's a certain glow of this money on their faces. But what happens outside the mines is also this informal market that kind of springs up, and they immediately go out and they start spending money, buying clothes and so on and so forth. So there's this informal market that springs up around the mines just as on payday and for a couple of days later. And we filmed it, but somehow I felt that was not something I could use. It didn't seem like material that I could somehow weave into it in terms of this, as you say, Nikhila, this Raja context. I just didn't know how to bring that in and what sense it would make in a film that mainly concentrated on work, labor, conditions of mobilization of labor, history of their strikes and so on and so forth. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you both for responding. Any other points? Anyone? Yeah, Tarakeshwar, you're unmuted. Go ahead.
Just a quick clarification I wanted from Janaki. Was there any, at any point of time, was there any conflict between the Janaki the historian and the Janaki the interlocutor? I could observe in one point in the documentary where the historian comes to the fore and says, no, actually they have not, this is not what has happened, but these people are saying like that. So you wanted to correct what they are speaking. At only one point I observed it, but I would like to hear your experience.
Yes, that was a genuine dilemma that, one had all kinds of things being recounted. As you know, from the subtitles, you can see that even calculation errors were made. So when he was talking about the number of workers, there was even a calculation error, and there was a dilemma. Should I leave it at that or shall I correct it? And of course, one has to leave it like that because that's. But there was a very interesting kind of moment when one wanted to say, "Hey, look, that's not what it's about." What I read was something quite different. But no, I had to let them speak. I had to remember. I had to let them remember their past in the way they wanted it to be remembered, and also importantly, it was all being remembered in the context of closure. So for instance, Tarakeshwar, the interesting thing that they said was that they remembered the colonial period nostalgically. They remember it as a period when the Englishmen got into the mines, when there was a rock burst and helped them to dig and helped them to thrive. There was this memory of the Englishman as being a great guy compared to what they called the Brahmin management that came later. They remembered them as in much warmer terms than they remembered the Indian management that followed. Now, for someone who's a historian of the colonial period and who's, I would say, there is an element of methodological nationalism even in what I write. That was a bit surprising. And, I kept wanting to say, hey, look, but didn't the Indian government bring this and that thing and so on and so forth? But they were really, hostile to what the Indian management had done because they felt they hadn't explored the mines the way they should have. They didn't expand mining activity, etc., etc. So, there was the frame of their remembrance was closure, and that was the constant thing that one had to deal with. That everything was being overdetermined, as it were, by the prospect of closure. And that was interesting for me, and I decided finally to let that flow as it did. I think that flow is quite obvious, as I said. I had to therefore contend with a certain disappointment that they weren't sort of ventriloquizing what I knew. That was impossible. But I think eventually it turned out to be quite interesting in spite of all that.
Yeah. Someone has just, Abhishek Chatterjee, who's watching this on Facebook, has just messaged me. He says, enjoying the discussion on the KGF documentaries. I grew up in KGF in the 90s and often visited the BGML colony where my father had friends. He worked in BEML, which dominated KGF in the 90s. BGML had become a relic by then. Janaki ma'am's documentary is a perspective I never experienced, though I was living there at the time in our bubble of BEML Nagar. So this is what Abhishek Chatterjee says. He said I could share his response, so that's why I just read it out. Yeah, I think Sridhar has unmuted. Sridhar, please go ahead.
Okay. I have not seen the second documentary because some technical glitch. So I have watched only Janaki Madam's documentary, but I enjoyed it differently actually, in the sense that whatever movie has come, they might have taken clue from Madam's movie, documentary more. They dramatized it, but the kind of things you have detailed and brought historical documents to speak. As a student of history, I like very much. The Tamilan, one of the popular journal of that time, and also how the around this KGF, various other activities also developed. Some Banyas from Rajasthan coming and settling here. And it's like reading book only. I liked it in the way it was done. So and now I want to go back and read your works. So I don't see these kind of technical details. I'm illiterate, so I cannot comment. But I don't see whatever the problems it was raised here in the discussion. But it was more informative, and it talks a lot about and something about air blasting. You have said, no, ma'am. Whenever it happens, people have died, and those coffins were reached individual households every day. So those details really, I feel that whatever is projected in the movie of KGF, same. So I felt that they have copied your idea completely. You can watch that movie, irrespective of dramatization. They have copied your idea very much. So I could connect both somehow. So anyway, I think everyone will become a sociologist or historian when they are making it. So I don't find anything wrong with that, but it's a beautiful documentary. I liked it. Though it is made in 96, 97, I was thinking while watching, it's 25 years now. So 25 years ago itself, you have imagined, and it is the days of early years of globalization. And all those ramifications are reflected in that documentary, how a transition is taking place. So I like that. I enjoyed it, a live one imagery. So there are things that what happens after
I think he lost his connection. Yeah. Maybe you can respond, Professor Janaki.
Yeah, I'm back. I think lost connection.
I think, yeah, we all lost a little bit there, but thank you very much, Sridhar, for those comments. And I also want to respond to the person who has been watching on Facebook Live to say, yes, BEML comes up much later and is adjoining the BGML as a public sector unit. I don't think there is much traffic between BEML and BGML, as is pointed out. And towards the end of my film, if you remember, there were these interviews with these youngsters who are studying in the first grade college there, and many of them express a certain disappointment that they were not able to find work in BEML, in spite of the fact that they lived in the area and so on. You also heard them voicing some kinds of disappointment at the fact that KGF had got a reputation for being a place that produced dissatisfied, disgruntled, and rather violent kind of youngsters. So there was a sort of it's not something I explored at all, neither in my writing nor in my filmmaking, but there was this presence of, this adjoining presence of another more well-endowed, more meaningfully productive Bharat Earth Movers unit compared with the gold mine, which was already in decline. So there was very much that sense of contrast, which, as I said, I didn't explore much at all. Sridhar, I just want to say thank you so much. You are referring to the rock bursts, I think, that people became accustomed to. I have seen the KGF film, only the first part. I've not seen the part two. And as Basav said, there's really no relationship at all with anything to do with KGF really. But in any case, it is interesting. I was never approached. I think I was only approached once in all the time in these last 24 years to actually provide footage. So I should mention here that one of the interesting things that happened is that a group called Padma, PAD.MA, took a great deal of trouble. They took all the footage from me, all the 16 hours. They are a group that is dedicated to actually transcribing and placing on public view original footage. So they have done that. So right now you have actually all those 16 hours available through the Padma site, pad.ma. And
I think they only have outtakes, ma'am. They don't
Okay.
have they only have the Aisha only. I think they put outtakes, as in which is not in the film, it's there. So it's an interesting.
Okay, because what they
Yeah.
told me was that they were putting up
Okay.
the entire lot. I might be wrong. Um, but there's some of that is there. I think I was once approached by some group, but I don't think it was to do with this KGF film. Others of the area have, of course, used the footage quite freely. And now that it's on YouTube, probably it will be even more widely available for people to use. I won't use any other word. But you know, that it's where it is. I just want to reflect back on what Tarakeshwar said at the outset, which is, you know, it might be interesting to speculate on what since there are two films which are separated by almost 22 or 23 years, what kinds of transformations in the landscape, what kinds of transformations in the memory of other times, etc., are uh, coming through to you in these films. It would be interesting to know that, because these two films are separated by quite a big gap. Um, you know, what is the sense of the difference that you get?
Yeah, and again, Abhishek responds by saying that he'll have to revisit the documentary, but the perspective really fascinated me and has made me reevaluate my memory of a place that seemed so idyllic. Um, yeah.
Yeah.
Sridhar, yes, you've unmuted. Go ahead. Oh, you're muted back, or maybe got disconnected. Anyone else?
Yeah, I had a question.
Yes, Nandini, please go
Yeah,
ahead.
hi.
Hi.
Yeah, I actually was reminded of Jonathan Parry's work on the Bhilai steel plant when I saw these two films. Although he's not talking about a deindustrializing situation, but he, you know, the way in which different groups, classes, castes, I mean, that kind of complex sort of social, you know, scene in these industrial areas it really reminded me of that. But I had actually a clarification I wanted from Basav. If I'm not, maybe I hope I didn't get it wrong, but on one hand, the BGML, there is an order saying they may be reopened by issuing global tenders. And on the other, the workers in your film were talking about workers taking it over. Can you hand it over to workers? Or were they suggesting that? Or did I get that wrong? Because the question of global tenders now then puts another kind of spin on this whole 25-year-old, you know, this that what we're getting from both films. So what kinds of conditions of exploitation, new conditions of labor exploitation? Yeah.
So to answer that is that the BGML cooperative employees cooperative that they have formed now is the one which is the petitioner against the government in the court, basically. So they are the one who who won it, who asked for the tender to be floated, etc. I think their adjustment with whoever wins the tender is basically going to be say that reinstate these workers who are part of the cooperative already, kind of.
So it's a question of actually reinstating the workers and not necessarily whose hands it goes.
Correct. I mean, whoever hands it goes to, whoever has it go to this cooperative is working with those hands, let's say that. Yeah. I mean, they're in touch with some foreign companies, etc. The man who comes in my film, Divakar, Mr. Divakar actually, yeah, he's already sort of in talks with some Australian firms. And so I think there is some kind of vested interests also there in how they want to move forward. Yeah. But it doesn't seem practical at
And
all. Like, yeah, because it doesn't look like it's going to happen in the sense that, the water has filled up. It'll take a massive investment and a massive operation to actually get it going again. So.
okay. And I had a question for Janaki. You said that
Actually,
you've been,
can I,
sorry.
before
Yeah,
that,
yeah.
can I come in on this, what you just said? Because I think there is some sort of corrective, if I might say. Of course, I have to confess that I have not been to the area for the last 20 years, but um, so my knowledge is not in that sense refreshed or updated. Basav is the more appropriate person. But at the time when I was filming, and since my knowledge of the mines and its history is a longer term one, it was very clear that there was no question of deep mining. There was no question, but because it requires resources and technologies of a kind that are simply not going to be possible any longer. So, because as I have said, we were probably the last to film underground before the mines were flooded. It's already flooded now with water. So the question of underground mining is probably a very, very fanciful idea. It's not going to happen. Two reasons. One, it's a pretty exhausted mine, and that was known from as early as the 1930s. And secondly, it is all that is left are some of the pillars, which if you mine them, the whole thing will simply collapse. So there's no question. In many cases, not even a possibility. What was being discussed was surface mining. And what was being discussed was the mining of the cyanide dumps for the traces of gold that are still there in the cyanide dumps, which is what was thrown away after the mining ore was mined. And for the surface mining, it might actually involve dismantling the townships. Now, I don't know which people are in these cooperatives and who are talking about the possibility of restarting mining, because without the surface mining is not a possibility unless you can dismantle the townships and actually mine right across that area. So, and secondly, given that it's a 23 or 20, more than 20-year gap, I doubt very much whether those who were being given a VRS at that time, who would have been in their 30s and 40s, will be in any position to take up jobs again. So I don't know which community of workers exactly is being referred to. So perhaps Basav can clarify for us.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. So the workers itself, I mean, the number of workers remaining from that are very few. That's why I said it's a little bit of the officer level people who are running this cooperative, so to say, in the leadership are probably the one who stand to benefit with whatever private entity comes in, whether in terms of actually mining or whether in terms of real estate, we don't know. But that's how it looks like. But I mean, I also interviewed BGML people, although they didn't want to be on camera when I made the film. They refused to come on camera. But their opinion was that government will never allow it to give it to private. That is why they are sort of, because I asked them why not, the court has already ruled what is the delay in calling for a tender, and the man who spoke to me, the in charge there, said that government is not willing to give it away to a private entity, so they will find a way to somehow do something about it. What they will do, he wasn't sure yet. And I think recently also we heard Prahlad Joshi, who's the current mining minister, I think. So with BJP coming in power, I think these guys are, Divakar at least felt that something will happen soon, but it hasn't yet. Yeah.
Excuse me.
Yeah. Yeah, that's all we know. But you're right, workers are no longer there. I mean, which workers they are talking about also we don't know. So we don't know. And what, of course, and it's also a question of huge amount of real estate. It's almost 12,000 acres and more than 12,000 acres, and many houses, residential ones also, which the workers' families have continued to live in, which actually belong to the company. So what will happen to all that, etc. So there are a lot of open-ended questions, even if government's willing to do anything about it. Yeah.
Nandini, you had another question?
Yeah,
Go
that was
ahead.
for Janaki.
Yeah.
Actually, since your film came out in 97 and the mines were closed in 2001, isn't it? 2001 or 2. So was the film, I mean, what responses were you getting from workers when the film was screened among, workers and unions and so on? How were they responding to the film?
Much about unions, but it was, as I said, there were two or three things that they liked about it. One was, as I said, many women had never seen the underground, so that was a new thing for them. You asked me an interesting question which came up during the filmmaking itself, and that is when you go with a camera, and especially in a place and a situation like this, you are the state. So people address you as if you are somehow the state, as if you are the sarkar, and that you can somehow intervene and set things right. And that was a very embarrassing thing to have to encounter. And then, of course, I realized that most people who go into locations like this will always encounter that expectation that we would actually be able to communicate to. If you notice, there were people who were directly talking to the state via the film. So there is a sense in which they felt you can address the state, and perhaps we are in a better position to address the state than them. um, there was probably therefore disappointment, because the film was about many things to do with the past rather than to do with their immediate present. At least the proportion of time talking about the past was quite high compared to what we spoke about the present, because of my own interests and my own commitment, etc. So I can only imagine that there would be some disappointment as well. But I really can't say now. I mean, to be frank, I didn't sort of collect those responses in any systematic way. I just, heard these anecdotal things, and that was nice.
It's a situation of despair as well, as is when you were there, So
yeah, that sense of despair. Actually, it says 2001 closure, but I think the actual dismantling of the shafts began just 2 or 3 years after I made the film. So the shafts, that is to say, the winding gear which is above ground, all that was dismantled long before 2001. I think 2001 became some sort of more formal closure.
Yeah, I think only one shaft was running by 2001. Everything else had shut down, if I remember. Yeah. And also it's interesting that in 20 years, the sense of despair has moved on to sort of sense of nostalgia and other kind of feelings about it, I think. Yeah.
The other thing about the documentary is also, I mean, this is one point, is the way in which Ramani has captured that almost that claustrophobia that you feel as you're sort of going down. I mean, it's very. I mean, one feels it very strongly, and so it's so well made. You really feel that sense of claustrophobia. Just one very quick thing, because it's just my curiosity, because I think in both it's mentioned, and certainly in yours, 11,000 feet deep. That's how deep they used to be. That's, I think both of you have mentioned, both films mention it.
Yeah. It's about 3.5 kilometers or 3.2 kilometers or something, basically. Yeah.
It's just incredible.
Yeah.
I think they are second only to some
South Africa.
mines.
South
So
African?
yeah, it is really deep mining. So
Oh, goodness.
yeah, so and as I said, we shot in about 1,000 meters, 1,000 or maybe 2,000
Meters or meters, feet?
meters. Sorry, feet.
Ah,
Sorry, feet.
huh.
So it was already flooded below that. We shot, So I think that at the time we were shooting, it was only going up to about 3,000 feet.
11,000. Staggering, absolutely.
Yeah. But I think that was only one of the mines, which was
Okay.
11,000 feet, not all of them. That was the deepest. I mean, for a long time, I think it was the deepest in the world until this South African mine came about, that's what at least I came to know. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Hello.
Nandini. Uday Shankar has unmuted. Please go ahead.
This is to Professor Janaki. Well-made documentary, madam. I just would like to know from you, you made the documentary just before the mines was closed. Your film must have been seen by many people. Was there any effect of your film on the government to reconsider the closure of the mines?
Oh, I wish that was the case, but I cannot at all claim anything like that. As I said, I sent a copy of the film to BGML itself, but I didn't hear from them. So I assume that the only thing they would have felt was disappointment, because I had spent long hours interviewing the management and I didn't use any of that footage. All of it was so useless because they were all talking about how well they were running the place, whereas my interest was in the workers. So no, I mean, I don't think. The answer is no. I don't think that people who had any kind of power even saw the film at that point. So it would be pretentious on my part to say it had any impact whatsoever. Not at all. I don't think so. It was like, to me, it was like a tribute to the long multi-generational workers to the production of gold. That was the spirit.
Okay, my second question is, after you made this film on BGML, did any other mines, did they make any documentary both on the mine history or the problems associated with the mines or the problems associated the workers with the workers?
Yes, there have been many films made on the coal mines. And in fact, I think Banjay Guhathakurta, whose name you might know, a very well-known journalist, he did a film on the coal fields of Jharia. There are films on Dhanbad and so on. So there are a lot of films on the coal fields. And especially about the fires on the coal fields, because that's quite dramatic also to see. Because, so there are films on the coal fields, certainly.
Yeah, even literature-wise, I mean, that was one of the aspects why I wanted to make the film, was because in the popular culture, in films or literature, we didn't have any mention of Kola goldfields at all, especially in the Karnataka popular culture, which was, I found it very strikingly missing, in terms of there is no novel which sort of, of course, I think Geeta wrote later in English Color of Gold, a novel set in KGF, but otherwise we don't have any literary reference to KGF or any cinematic reference, which is sad.
Okay. Madam, I have one last question.
Sure.
BGML came into, the mines came into the hands of the government somewhere in 50s, right, madam?
Correct, yes.
56 or something like that.
Yeah.
You had any chance to interview with the people, the British people who were earlier working in this mine?
No, I didn't actually. In fact, there was absolutely no reflection of that earlier period. Not even with people who had, in fact, I have a very close relative whose father was the general manager, but he was already dead by the time I made the film. So there was nobody at all that I could speak to, even about the previous generation, leave alone the 50s and the 40s. In fact, I found it little difficult to even find photographs of an earlier period, which was surprising. I was surprised that there wasn't as much photographic trace of that place. I had the opportunity of going to England at that time, and I could not find even in the archives there any material, visual material related to this, which was really surprising. And one other scholar of KGF, Colin Simmons, has mentioned that the archives of the John Taylor and Son was burnt, and it's likely that much of that was lost in that fire. At any rate, I was not at all successful in either making contact with people who had been there earlier or who, I mean, that is to say, the British management, or with people of even a previous generation, let alone from the 40s and 50s.
Yeah, but I mean, in my film, there are two old ladies who are, but I mean, of course, they didn't directly work. The Anglo-Indian lady, Mrs. I forgot her name now, but she actually is around 90, and she's the one who sings the song in my film about going back to Ireland. And she told, I mean, about her husband and how they worked, etc. And the other Anglo-Indian lady also was there from 30s. She was of German origin, married to a British, and she's still there in KGF. So they are the ones I spoke to, who were sort of in there, living in KGF from 1930s at least. Yeah, and that was, I found, of course, their husbands worked, so they didn't directly work. They worked in school later on as teachers in KGF school. Yeah, that was, yeah, those are the two women I found. Yeah.
I should clarify that when I was responding to your question, Mr. Uday Shankar, I was referring to management. I, of course, did speak to workers who had been in KGF. As you know, the entire film is about that. So there were many people who had been working there in the 40s and in the 50s. But as far as management is concerned, I certainly had no opportunity at all to talk to people who had been in that level of management in the earlier period, and so that was my response. Workers, I certainly did speak to many who had been there in the earlier period.
Yeah, thank you, Uday Shankar, for your questions. Yeah.
Okay, that's all right now.
Okay, thank you. Geeta, you've unmuted. Please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Janaki and Basav. I really enjoyed your documentaries. I have a question for Janaki. There's a scene in your film in which the workers at the end of the day are patted down by security guards, to check for theft, possibly. And so I was wondering, given the fact that a documentary has real people and not actors playing the role of minors, by filming that scene, with the camera focusing on the minors' underwear, I was wondering if that was, probably like a replication of the daily humiliation of the workers. So do you think it was necessary to show that with that kind of graphic detail?
You've raised a very important question, and I think a very important ethical question as well. First of all, I should say that I was not allowed into that area at all. So I was not present even when that filming happened. It was only Ramani, only men who were allowed in there, even to see it and to film it. So I was not there. It happened in my absence. But that's not an answer to your question. The question you're raising is a very important one, whether that kind of... So first of all, I should say that in every case, we took the permission of the workers to be able to describe their lives. And people did feel that it was a necessary part of their lives that needed to be talked about. I don't know how they would have felt had they seen it in a context which was obviously, as you say, very graphically revealing an invasive search, and then there is the further invasion of the camera as well. Um, uh, True, we could have possibly left it out and left it to, but it seemed like I mean, the whole setting was one where I felt we focused not on their humiliation so much as their sense of anger at this daily process of, being searched. And there's a lot of popular song related to this question of being searched, the question of being actually unfairly accused of theft, and so on and so forth. So it is a very central part of their lives. It could be that we could have made the decision to simply talk about it without necessarily supplementing it with the kinds of visuals that we finally did. But since the footage was there, and since we did not have any kind of course, this is not the time when I shot the film, I have to confess, there was no such system of informed consent, etc. We didn't take pieces of paper from them which said, can we use this footage, etc. I'll be very frank, it was well before such systems of ethical practices came into being for social science research and this kind of. I think today, if you had to do something like that, it would be probably objected to more strenuously. But my memory of that is that there was no necessary objection to that being used if it actually spoke about the kinds of humiliations that they had to encounter. But you raised an important question that one would, I mean, probably, as I say, one would have a very different attitude to it today compared with what we did have in those days.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, Sridhar is unmuted. Go ahead, Sridhar.
No. See, Nikhila, I'm sorry. I don't know how to work with mobile. Sorry.
Okay, fine. Doesn't matter. Yeah. Anyone else? Yes, Sanjay. Sanjay, please go ahead.
Yeah, I found it a very fascinating experiment to combine history with memory. So when I was watching Janaki's film, and when it started, there is in the darkness there's some light, and then for almost, I think, 2 minutes we don't see anything. I mean, there is darkness and a little bit of light is coming from which source we don't know. Then slowly, so as a viewer, we are trying to find out what the camera is trying to show, and nothing is visible. Then I was reminded of Paradise Lost of Milton, when there is a furnace blowing, and it is blowing not to produce light but to show to make the darkness visible. So that there's some kind of light was required, not to show something else but only to make the darkness visible, so that the darkness could be visible. Because if there is no light, it is blank, it is nothing. What we see on the screen is nothingness, but some kind of light is required so that we can see the darkness. So that was very interesting to begin with. Otherwise, I found it very comprehensive, uh, the way you dealt with several issues, like the workers movement, for example, the habitation of workers, where they are living in some kind of um, very makeshift arrangement, and then they have to shift also whenever it is required. Then the abandoned ditches also, where the poor people, they come with the basket, where they have to gather a lot of dust in order to find out a little bit of gold. After a lot of attempts, they find just a small bit of gold which they can sell. So for that, they're spending so much of time. So that scene was very touching for me. And then in Basav's film, also talking about celebration of festivals, for example, that how they are. So it's also like presenting the community living. Then again, talking about the class dynamics and caste dynamics, both also. That how different castes they have, what is the constitution of the workers, the percentage. With the statistics, you're also showing that what kind of uh, discrimination they had to face. Also the regional dynamics, um, which is made explicit in the film of Basav by saying that it is at the at a place where it touches three states. So you have Tamil Nadu, Andhra, and Karnataka. So workers are coming from different places. Then you also talk about the difference in wages. So one of the persons interviewed says that for the same kind of job, a European used to get 20 times more. So that difference was huge compared to an Indian worker or Indian whatever executive or somebody. Then again showing in a very subtle way and also dealing with it, the occupational hazard, that how they have to face different kind of dangers, and finally what happens that they are themselves blamed for that they are careless, the workers are careless when they die, when they are maimed, when they lose their limbs. So different kinds of accidents happen inside that. And also one of the persons is talking about the difference between the pre-independence, rather when it was taken over by the central government. So what happens, and that person says that there is no development once the central government took it from the British. So I was interested in the way, like and I also found that some certain topics are like touched, they are a little bit discussed also, but maybe in some future works people can take them and they develop them into further latest new narratives. So there is a lot of scope again, because it's a film of 1 hour again. Maybe as you said, of course, after editing it came to 1 hour, but I think there are a lot of aspects which can still be further researched upon, developed, exploited, for other kinds of work. So I was interested in knowing like how, when you started working on it, I think, and as Tarkis was saying that you had already written the book. So how did you do the documentation? Where did you like get these documents? Some of these like certain books from the certain pages from the books you are showing also in the film. So what kind of documents were available? Because it's also it becomes like a kind of oral history also, as you're mixing history, traditional conventional kind of history, juxtaposing with the oral accounts, the interview with the workers, because workers are also talking about their own like memory of the family, that how father worked, how grandfather worked. So many things are like present there in the documentary. So I was interested in, at the level of research, when you uh, wanted to make this film, what kind of documents were available, and how you had access to them.
Oh, thank you
Yes.
for those questions. I like the fact that you're bringing up this very complex relationship between history and memory. I was definitely the historian who was acquainted with the archives, with the material remains of that location, and it was the workers who were, you know, who were describing things from on the basis of their memory. As I said, there was that gap, and I allowed that gap to continue to exist, even if it was sometimes wrong, because it kind of just showed you what was important. To answer your question about what the documentation was, I had consulted extensively archives in various locations. So what I've used are, there was one album of photographs that was with the management, and I was allowed to photograph that. And those were the only few physical remnants of an earlier time, which I've used. As much as I could, I used it. The others were these records, for example, records of accidents, which I felt I hadn't used enough. There were dozens and dozens of books of the meticulous records kept of the accidents in the mines, and I wanted to give a flavor of that, so we, of course, shot that. And the other place where I had done research was in the Hindu archives in Madras, so we shot a few images of the newspapers in which news of KGF had appeared. In fact, while we were shooting that, it occurred to me that on the very day that the 1930 strike broke out was the day that Gandhi broke the salt law. So I don't know if you noticed it because it's a very fleeting moment, but we filmed that news about Gandhi breaking the salt law as a way of bringing these two events into direct contact, because it was on that day that the strike breaks out in KGF. KGF was in that sense quite enclaved and quite protected, if you like, from the national movement. So it was not, the strike did not happen because of the national movement at all. In fact, it was completely a local affair that was being protested against. But it was interesting for me that there was that coincidence that, you know, it was, the strike was breaking out in the small place at the same time that this historic breaking of the salt law was happening in another location. And the newspaper kind of brings us together classically, like, you know, Benedict Anderson tells us what newspapers do to nationalism. So we use that, that kind of resource. The other thing that I wanted to give a flavor of was this Orupaisa Tamiran, which was a Tamil newspaper of the South Indian Buddhist Society. Aida Das had started it in Chennai, in Madras, and it moved to the Siddhartha Press in KGF and continued there for a long time. So those volumes were in KGF. We were able to film some of those. So those articles about, you know, talking about caste and caste oppression and so on was from those materials that we found in KGF. So I was actually quite lucky that people opened up all kinds of materials to me. But they had opened up those materials to me for the research I did for my book. It was only a question of reopening those links for the purpose of the film. The CPM, the CITU, that is, which had the Bharat Gold Mines Employees Union, also gave me their pamphlets to look at. So that was also a resource. So you're right, you know, there is I have tried to use some literary sources, that not literary, but you know what I'm saying, printed sources occasionally, interweaving it with the other kinds of visual sources, just to give a sense of the period, the sense of documentation of that period, etc. So yeah, I don't know who else does that kind of thing, but yeah, it was for me very necessary because it had to fill the gaps, as it were, you know, some of the gaps between what people were saying and trying to put it into this framework of history.
Janaki, I know it's well past the deadline that you gave us, but just before you leave, if Shailaja madam or Usha madam want to respond, Matadtira madam, Shailaja, Usha, Shailaja.
ನಾನು ಫಿಲ್ಮ್ ನೋಡಿದ್ದೀನಿ, ಚೆನ್ನಾಗಿದೆ. ಜಾನಕಿ ಮೇಡಮ್ ಅವರದು ಅದು ಏನಿದೆ ಡಾಕ್ಯುಮೆಂಟೇಶನ್ ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಅದರಲ್ಲಿ ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಒಂದು ಮೂರು ತಲೆಮಾರನ್ನ ತಕೊಂಡ್ಬಿಟ್ಟು ಅವರ ಮೆಮೊರಿ ಮೂಲಕ ಎಕ್ಸ್ಪೀರಿಯನ್ಸ್ ಅನ್ನ ತಂದಿಟ್ಟು ಇಡೀ ಆ ಒಂದೇನಿದೆಯಲ್ಲ ಆ ಒಂದು ಇಶ್ಯೂವನ್ನ ಇಟ್ಕೊಂಡು ಅವರು ಪ್ರಾಬ್ಲಮಟೈಸ್ ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಂಡು ಅದನ್ನ ನೋಡೋ ಪ್ರಯತ್ನ ಮಾಡಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ನನಗೆ ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಅವರು ಒಳಗಡೆ ಕೆಲಸ ಮಾಡುವಾಗ ಅವರು ಲೇಬರ್ ಆಗಿ ಅವ್ರನ್ನ ಫೋಕಸ್ ಆಗಿ ತೋರಿಸಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಆಮೇಲೆ ಹೊರಗಡೆ ಅವರು ಸೊಸೈಟಿ ಮುಖಾಮುಖಿ ಆದಾಗ ಅವರು ಕಮಿಡಿಯನ್ಸು, ಜಾತಿ ಪ್ರಶ್ನೆಗಳು ಅದು ಬರ್ತದೆ. ಟೋಟಲ್ ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಒಂದು ಲೇಬರ್ ಆಗಿ ಒಳಗಡೆ ಇದ್ದಾಗ ಅವರು ಎದುರಿಸುವ ಸಮಸ್ಯೆಗಳು ಬೇರೆ, ಲೇಬರ್ ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಕೆಲಸ ಮಾಡುವ ಕಾರಣಕ್ಕಾಗಿ ಅವರು ಸೊಸೈಟಿಯಲ್ಲಿ ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಮನೆ ಬಾಡಿಗೆ ಬಿಡುವ ಒಂದು ಇಶ್ಯೂ ಇಟ್ಕೊಂಡಿರ್ಬಹುದು. ಈ ತರ ಬೇರೆ ಬೇರೆ ಒಂದು ಸಮಸ್ಯೆಗಳನ್ನ ಎದುರಿಸುವ ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಮಲ್ಟಿಪಲ್ ಏನಿದೆ ಅಲ್ಲ ಅವರು ತೋರಿಸಿದ್ದು ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಮಲ್ಟಿಪಲ್ ಒಂದು ಸಮಸ್ಯೆಗಳ ಮೇಲೆ ಅವರು ಒಂದನ್ನ ಫೋಕಸ್ಡ್ ಆಗಿ ಅದನ್ನ ತಂದಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಚೆನ್ನಾಗಿತ್ತು. ಐ ಎಂಜಾಯ್ಡ್ ಎ ಲಾಟ್.
ಓಕೆ, ಉಷಾ ಮೇಡಮ್ ಏನಾರು ಹೇಳ್ತೀರಾ?
Can't see her.
Oh, okay.
Hello.
Yeah. Please go ahead.
I have one small question. Can I go ahead?
Yeah.
This is to both Mr. Basuraj and Professor Janaki Nair. Both of them have made a very nice, wonderful documentary. I was just wondering whether this could form a basic material for our management institutes to take up case studies on the mining industry, which was flourishing so well and came to a dead halt, and as well as the associated labor-related problems, and the rehabilitation, retraining, and redeployment of such closed industry laborers.
Yeah. Janaki, Basav, before you respond, Swarnavel Ishwaran has also unmuted. So before you respond to Uday Shankar, I think Swarnavel Ishwaran, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Nick. And thank you, Janaki and Basav, for your very important, very significant film, and also for the discussion, wonderful discussion we had. So I just wanted, it's more of a observation than a question. That is, one thing we can notice is how this 23 years gap is talking to us about the the aesthetics because of technology, the technomateriality, the digital, and the prior to the digital era, and also that contributes to that graininess, to the darkness, that adds to that the politics of Janaki's film, as people mention in so many different ways, the claustrophobia, and also as she pointed out, that the dialectics between Ramani's style of holding on to faces and the larger vista she wants to cover. They in fact add to that sense of urgency and immediacy and contribute to that film. And that prior to digital we can see that people are not that much focused on saturation and the kind of finesse which almost adds a sense of artifice to what we are watching today. And therefore that contributes to Basav's work, because that it's more distant, more nostalgic, because things are closed, and then that kind of aesthetics adds to what you are trying to so that's one thing I just wanted, among the many other things we can talk about in terms of the aesthetics and technology. The other thing that struck me was that going back to Janaki's book, which I think is seminal work on the historiography of unionism, or their history. There we have the Kolar gold mine and also the industrial workers in Bangalore in the book. Here, it's about her as an interlocutor in the film and about the people. So that tension is interesting here, and also in the book there is the subtext of caste, which comes through because you have a lot of space to write in a book. Here, that comes through just through the faces. So that I thought was poignant, because that is what visual media or film or documentary could contribute in terms of adding the depth to the lived reality, even if that it may lack the cohesiveness of a written book in terms of focus. But then this brings in other kind of ruptures, and then as a historian or interlocutor, you try to give us through your voiceover where you want to go, what direction it has to, and yet it comes back to their memory. And I think that emotion adds a lot. Also because now we know the history that it is, almost also through the film, it's kind of prefiguring closure. And then, Basav's Flame is about that nostalgia. Also, that when all these Anglo-Indians talk about, that very framing, the singing, as we pointed out. So I think that it was a great opportunity to watch both these films together. So thank you. Thank you, Janaki and Basav, and thank you, Nikhila and Geeta and all the participants.
Yeah, thanks, Swarnavel. Swarnavel's perspective is very unique. He's both a filmmaker as well as an academic who teaches in University of Michigan State University. Any responses, Janaki, Basav to Shailaja, to Swarnavel, Uday Shankar? Anything you want to say? I think,
Yeah.
yeah. Please.
No, I just wanted to say thank you for talking about aesthetics. It was, I'm glad somebody spoke about it because I think that's one difference between the two approaches in these two films, which is interesting. To respond to Mr. Uday Shankar's question, in fact, what happened was in IIM Bangalore, there is one professor, Pratik, and there is one more researcher who's doing a PhD on Mysore State's entrepreneurship in early 20th century or something. So they actually watched my film, and I think they screened it in class also. And because I think the professor is also working on caste in industrial history. So so there is, some way, somebody has seen this film is what I could say, but I don't know how much they are going to apply, or even if management graduates from these institutes go on to even work in Indian, companies or something also is a sort of a distant dream, I would say. Most of them go abroad, especially IIM people. But yeah, so that's one thing. Just to add to the aesthetics part, I think that is one thing the documentary medium allows you to do, to play around much more experimentally in terms of aesthetics. And my goal was to sort of try and build in the rhythm and the pace, rhythm, and the sensibility of the place within the film, instead of because I felt a lot of work of Janaki's film already does in conveying the story and the politics, etc. So I didn't want to repeat that. So my idea was to create more visual portrait, like I said earlier, with focusing more on this aspect of the current status of the place while speaking about particular histories as interviews. Yeah, over to Professor.
Thank you for all those questions. Shailaja, you're quite right. There were many cross-cutting questions of caste and class and religion that one simply had to show, however briefly. I know it was very brief and probably even superficial, but it was necessary to give a sense of the kinds of transformations that work in the minds actually enabled. I'm able to, as has been rightly pointed out, do that a bit more in detail in the book because it allows me that kind of space and time. But yes, it was a challenge not to make it simply a string of things which interested me and which is discrete and unconnected. So I hope that the visual medium actually allows for that kind of connection to happen more easily. Whether it will work as a case study for management schools, I have my own doubts. I should confess, I'm by nature a pessimist, so it's not likely that this will be seen at all as a valuable case study for management schools. It has been used, as I said, in classes, in history, labor history classes, and also in classes by anthropologists and sociologists. People who are interested in small towns, etc. But I don't know of any example. I think I once showed it in IIM Calcutta, but that is about the one and only time I showed it to a management school. So I'm not optimistic about it being considered a good case study. It doesn't also, at least my film doesn't talk about possible options, in that sense. As I said, the only option was cyanide dump mining, and that was already being discarded as an option in those days. I want to return to this question by, I think it was Sanjay who talked about light and dark, especially in the beginning of the film, to connect it with what Swarnaveel has asked, to say that you're right. As I said to you, the only light that was used was the light from the headlamp, and that was a conscious choice of the camera person, and I went along with that decision, and I felt it worked well. So the first few minutes show you only these cross-cutting headlamp lights. There's not much else. Almost all the other films that I saw on KGF, which dealt with the underground, the promotional films and so on, used a lot of light. And that kind of really took away from the mystery and the danger of that darkness. So I appreciate what you're saying, that you need a little bit of light even to see the darkness. But I felt that this kind of headlamp actually did that work. But maybe it hasn't come through as well as it should have in the first few minutes, especially. It is very interesting that you talk about a pre-digital age, because it might interest you to know that the film was actually shot on digital camera. It was shot on and in fact, the digital film was so rare in Madras at that time, and I bought a new film, and the person who sold it to me said, I will give it to you only on condition that you sell it back to me when you're finished with it. Because there were no digital editing facilities then. It was only digital film and digital camera that was available. So actually the filming was done on digital. It was then transferred to Betamax for the purposes of editing. And so it went through many versions. In fact, the actual rough edit was done on video, VHS. So it went through many transfers and so on and so forth. And of course, it has been a long time. So the version that you are seeing has many dropouts and so on because it's so old. The Betamax tapes have lost a lot of their quality. I still have the Betamax tapes, but I wouldn't even know where to show or use it. It's all now, of course, the format is completely digital. First on CDs, and then finally it is now just available in the digital format online. So it's very interesting you mentioned that, because we couldn't explore the possibilities of digital at that time because there were no digital editing facilities that were easily available then.
Also, the quality of the VHS, it comes through in your film when we watch it, the analog quality, that right. It's like watching through the VHS. Also, the earlier, that 1995, Sony had this digital camera, but that was very different, from the kind of sensors we have in the digital now.
Oh, I'm sure. Yes.
Yeah, because it's like there was just one sensor for all the three colors. So that it was more closer to the analog, kind of format. So your film has that quality, and that I think is very special because because it looks so unsaturated, it looks so real, or it mirrors or reflects the workers' plight or predicament itself. For me, but, it's more closer to the imperfections of the celluloid. Then what we have now with the highly saturated, the colors, and then we have to kind of desaturate to make it look more real in post-production.
Yeah, I wouldn't be able to comment with any degree of authority on these questions. I'm sure Basav has more to say on this. And you definitely have some experience and knowledge of this. As I said, that was my one and only film. So I have not been in the film world after that. So,
but you can be proud of, because it's also, a film in your terrain, about mobilization, about union and that history. And it's a very special film in many ways. That, when you look at it now, because it's a very important documentation of that history. Because, that here, see, I teach documentary cinema. And there is a week on mining in every semester I teach. And I'll be screening, this Holland County and, this behemoth from China. But I also want to screen, your end, excerpts from your end, Basav's films. But I use readings from your book, when I teach, those courses. Yes.
Thank you so much. So was it just that you were unaware of the film, or was it that you...
That is, I was aware that you have made it, but I was not aware that it is available in YouTube and, that you can access it so easily.
Yeah, well, that's very...
Because once I remember that I wrote to Magic Lantern, because there Ramani puts all his work, but your film was not there, so then I thought, that I was wondering how to get it. And also, that here, that because of this Appalachian country and my own teacher at Iowa, Shasha Waters, they made, there is a long discourse surrounding mining in the US, particularly as far as documentary cinema is concerned. So because that is why, it is very important to document that history, and that you have done it, like 23 years back is something, which is, I think extremely important even for us as documentarians in the history of documentaries in India.
Thank you so much. That really gives me some real, I want to take some pleasure in that comment of yours.
Of course, I know your investment is, through labor and, how things come across, so kind of up on your face when you talk about mining.
Yeah.
As we were already talking in so many words, that the very, the working conditions and visually, through a medium like cinema. But also, I think, it goes back to the long history about, industrialization and this moment, where we are at the intersection, of environment and industry and the plight of workers, traditional workers. So that way also it attains its significance, yours as well as Basav's work.
I think we are spoiled for choice in terms of mining films on coal all over the world, whether it's South Africa or, or definitely England. Excellent films from England on the coal mining strike, especially of 85. And of course, Holland County, you mentioned.
Yes.
The Marikana massacre, so there is some stuff on that as well. Although those are all sort of political movements which are described rather than actual conditions of work underground and so on. Yeah, so you're right. Was it you or someone else who mentioned the word? So this is documentary in the strict sense of the term. My interest really was in documenting that.
Yes.
Not just that moment, but also those processes which I felt were in danger. And I was really lucky that I was able to film the actual creation of the gold bar. That smelting was happening so rarely, and the smelting was happening just when we were there. So I was very fortunate about that, to see the entire process, as it were, rather than just see one or another piece of it.
There's also, sentences for cinema, from the times of Chaplin, his gold rush, to the great film called Greed, prospecting for gold. And, you are showing the other side of it, not the fantasy, but the, lived conditions, the reality. Yes. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, both of you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, thanks, Swarnavel. I think, Janaki, it's quite late in the day for you. And
yes, it is.
So I think we'll thank you now at this point and let you go. If anyone wants to still continue the discussion, I hope Basav will not mind staying with us for a little while longer. So Janaki, thank you so much for letting us know that your film is available, and so that we could all watch.
Yes. I'm delighted that this has happened, and in fact, I had requested some of my students in JNU to do it, and they will do it, ma'am. We'll put it on YouTube, but of course, it didn't happen. So it has happened now, and I'm really pleased that it's available for people to use in whichever way they want, as an example or as a history or whatever it is. And yes, in juxtaposition with Basav's film, I'm sure it will make for some very interesting discussions amongst younger people as well. So
Yeah.
do keep me informed and feel absolutely free to use it. As I said, it's taken a second birth, I should say, after this. As I said, it seems like more people are watching it now than ever in its last 23 years. So thank you all so much for your interest, for your extremely engaging questions. I've made a note of all the questions so that I can think about them. I don't have, as you saw, answers for every one of them, but thank you all the same. Thank you very
Thank you,
much.
Janaki.
Good night.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you.
you.
Thank you,
Good night.
Janaki.
Thank
Nice
you
seeing
very
you
much.
again.
Good night.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Nikhila,
Bye.
I will also take leave.
Okay.
Thank you, Basav. Thank you, Nikhila, Geeta.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Tara, everybody here. Thank you.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah. Anyone else wants to come in now or to talk about the film? Nandini, yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, actually, no, because I was having a private conversation with this. I might as well I wanted to really say that one shot of those workers on Mayday just blew me away. I mean, I don't think I've seen something like that ever, that they're all dressed in red shirts.
Yeah.
And this is something that's a memory. And when you think of their lives as miners in the dark bleakness of that, work life, and then you see them on the streets in those red shirts. It's an amazing photograph, and thank you so much for that. It was amazing. And since you said that it was from the C2 archives, how does one actually look at this? Because this is also, this is there in all deindustrializing areas, right? The
Yeah.
fact that how do you actually preserve the visual and other archives? So it's happened in some place. Bombay is a good example, I mean, in some sense.
Yeah.
But the smaller places, it's really not. So what is the way ahead, do you think?
Yeah, I think that's what intrigued me, because I had seen, Jai Shankar and Anjali's work on Bombay Mills, right? Where they documented the poetry, the visual, pamphlets of protests, etc., from the C2 archives and other archives there, which are very haphazard. So when I was making this film, I was very determined to find these visual, one of the thing which strikes anyone who goes through those small alleys in KGF, in the near the workers' residential areas, you'll see marks. Like I've shown this painting in the film. There's Marx, there is Frederick Engels and Ambedkar everywhere. In the lower class residential area, which was amazing imagery to sort of live with every day for them. And that is what caught my eye. And when I found these albums, I mean, it took some coaxing, repeatedly meeting the CITU guy, I mean, the CPI, I'm the Communist Party person now, not CITU is no longer really there. So, and made him get the key and open it for me, and I had to pay him a small bribe, etc., all that. And maybe because of that, the access is little limited, because you have to really find these backhanded ways to access CITU office, which is very small, it's just like one small 1 BHK kind of house, and which is also now unused. So when I opened, it was full dusty, and luckily they were convinced that they can hand over the key to me. So I'm hoping to really access it more. And they have albums of photographs of strikes over the years, and I mean protests and their functions and their election minutes, and all those kind of, and even the two locally famous leaders like KS Vasan and Govindan, who were the Communist Party workers, and their lives itself is kind of folklore in KGF. So I was quite interested. I happened to meet Govindan's daughter,
Wow.
and collect. She's in the film. She's the one who talks about the Mayday. Yeah. So
Oh,
she,
that's
yeah,
her.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. I was
Yeah, yeah.
wondering who she was. She sounded like a person with a link to. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So hearing his story and even from her own archive, finding his own letters, and he, before he died, he wrote his own biography, kind of like a long, 70 page, just pages, and which he has preserved. So all this material is there. That's what I'm trying to sort of, kind of interpret all this material and build a narrative into a book. And that's the book I'm working with, actually, with Leftward, which hasn't still materialized thanks to this pandemic, which has cut down my travel, actually. Yeah. Yeah.
But is there no hope of digitization at all?
I mean, there is hope in the sense that there needs to be some funds. So I don't know who
and
will fund it, right? So that's the question. Yeah. And there is, I mean, these are forgot. I mean, in a way, these are forgotten history. When you talk of KGF, people want to talk about the mind, the British, the colonial capitalism, all these ideas. But this workers' struggle is sort of forgotten in terms of the material culture of the struggle.
That's right.
Yeah.
What a pity. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you.
Look forward to your book.
Hopefully. Yeah.
Will happen.
Thank you.
Yeah. Anyone else? Anyone else would like to respond to the films? Rajan, Jayanto. Okay. If there are no more, Tarakeshwar, please go ahead. And Jayanto has unmuted, then Tarakeshwar.
Okay.
Jayanto, please go ahead.
Okay, I really don't have any comment to make right now. I only say that we have often heard that filmmaking, the film is probably the most collaborative of art forms. So that is something which is a truism. For the first time, I saw a collaboration not between the different parts of the filmmaking unit, but also between two filmmakers in order to come out a film. This is something which I found very unique, and this was really great. This was really great. And it sort of bodes well.
Yeah, hello.
I think we have lost him.
Jayanto, are you there?
Okay.
Okay, Tarakeshwar, go ahead.
I finished. Thank you.
Okay.
Mine is not directly related to the film as such, because the question of the cast has come up in the film and also in the discussion. So, and the KGF is seen as a kind of enclave. So, in terms of the Dalit assertion, so we see Ambedkar, yes, but also there is Ayodhya Dasar. There is a connection that has been established between Ayodhya Dasar, was one of the earliest Buddhist Dalit scholar in Tamil Nadu and KGF. So, and also Ambedkar comes much later compared to Ayodhya Dasar. And also the Dalit movement in Kolar itself was very strong from the 70s onwards. One is the population of Dalit in that district, not only in KGF but also in Kolar. That might have given rise to it. Was there any kind of spillover of this organized either Ayodhya Dasar or Ambedkar movement or even left in KGF to Kolar? Because Kolar district, the erstwhile Kolar district, was one of the places from where we used to get a communist MLA elected.
Yeah.
Bhagyapalli Sriram Reddy, even few years back. So in that sense, was there a spillover of these, what was happening within the enclave, the kind of ideological development struggles that were rooted in KGF, spilling over to Kolar, or the Kolar as a region, starting from 3rd century Ajivika movement and several other non-Avedic movements being strong in that area, giving rise to this Dalit movement, both in KGF as well as in Kolar in general.
Yeah.
So I just wanted whether you can say anything about that.
Yeah, I mean, not convincingly completely, but sure, what I can tell you is that one of the things which I found is KGF alienates itself a little bit from the rest of the region very uniquely because of its linguistic population, which is mostly Tamil. So the for a long time, the Ambedkarite movement was very popular there in the sense, I think Murugan, the MLA who was there from RPI, first he was a Scheduled Caste Federation party leader, then it became RPI later. So Ambedkarite movement was very active, combined with left. So it was actually against each other, left versus RPI. And there was, and then came the Dravidian movement. So there were these three major forces. Even now, there, only place in Karnataka where you will find AIDMK or DMK fighting election will be KGF, right? So which is very unique to KGF that way. So that, but that I didn't find that really spilled over to all this, Dravidian assertion of Dalit, movement to really spill over to Kolar. In fact, what we found, what I found is in Kolar, it's more, it suddenly becomes, it comes back to the Karnataka mold, right? So only when there is a Lok Sabha election, of course, KGF also plays a part in the whole Kolar constituency, but not in the, the local body or assembly elections. Only in the Lok Sabha election, which also now it's BJP, right? So which is the BJP guy won last time, and I did cover the election for a website at that time, and that was it is quite interesting because KGF, although it's very unique in its it still has Communist Party ward members. Like the municipal elections are mostly won by Communist Party or RPI and those kind of people, but at MLA level it moves to Congress. There used to be Communist Party, like you said earlier, but now it's mostly Congress or JDS or BJP. And also to kind of, what is very interesting is to cater to the KGF politics, all these unions, whether it's the BJP union, workers union, or the JDS workers union, or Congress AITC, they have always been active in KGF and they continue to be active because, like now BML is on the brink of closure. So all these unions are getting together to fight against the closure of BML. If you go to KGF today, you'll see board in front of BML which says not for sale. So that because of that workers thing, or the presence of the unions of these parties is more than, I would say, direct electoral politics. But of course, it started with KC Reddy. If you remember the whole KGF unionization and movement, it started with the AITC, the Congress, with KC Reddy fighting in KGF, forming a union, etc. But then the Communist Party became the more leader in the unions, and then RPI came along, etc., etc. So, but yeah, I mean, in my assessment, I find KGF ruled even today by Communist Party and scheduled caste populations assertion through Dravidian parties or RPI as well. Yeah.
Thank you. So yeah, as you said, 2 months back in February, I went to Dravidian University Kuppam. So I went through KGF.
Yeah.
So I could see that board in front of the BTML. It is not for sale, and there was a tent, and they were speaking that it should not be closed. Thank you.
Basav, if I may ask you a question, actually two questions. One is this question I wanted to ask earlier about BML also, which is facing closure. So since you know the sort of social topography of the area, in the KGF, of course, had largely Tamil workers, right? And Dalit and Tamil workers, whereas BML might not have had, it may have had Kannadiga people from Karnataka. So what is the questions? I mean, how does that play out now? In the current context of sort of worker mobilization and coming together, because it seemed to me, and this is my second sort of thing, it's not a question, but it was very interesting to see the way in which that kind of Tamil assertion is also being played out. It's caste is there, but it's also very much linguistic.
Yeah.
And this sort of targeting the, I mean, the way they were talking about how they're supporting Tamil Elam and they're not supporting us, So we are also Tamil Elam, almost they're saying, So these are two questions. So one is this thing of, BML and the minds and two different kinds of, socio-linguistic, cultural, whatever backgrounds, and what worker solidarity in this context. And the other is this question of the Tamil identity. It's not a question, but I'm just interested and I was wondering how it plays out.
It's very interesting. The Tamil assertion or the Tamil movement, which was very active in KGF, in the sense, some of the history I interviewed a few people who were involved in the struggle for, when the VK Gokak, Gundurao was chief minister, and they said, everybody should, the first language should be Kannada. KGF was up in arms. There were protests, and in fact there was firing, and people were killed by the police firing. So because they were like, we should be given the right to study in our mother tongue, which is Tamil, which is not Kannada. So Tamil Sangam, there is an organization, linguistic organization called Tamil Sangam, which was kind of leading these protests, and they even in fact went all the way to Indira Gandhi for a petition, and afterwards, of course, Gundurao rolled back the ruling, etc. So, which is very interesting history, because in Karnataka we are somehow not aware of this. We talk of Dr. Rajkumar supporting VK Gokak movement, etc., etc., but we are not aware of these border places like KGF, which were not really happy with this kind of decisions, right? Judgments. So that Tamil Sangam was very active, and they ran as a linguistic society for the growth of Tamil in KGF, but somehow now it is almost a dying organization. There is actually no one who sits in the office there in Tamil Sangam. I went a couple of times, but it is always locked and nobody knows who has the key, So it's sad, but that linguistic movement of Tamil is almost negligible now, as is the communist movement, to say in KGF today. Although the presence is significant compared to other places, but it is still, negligible. The BML, however, like you said, has a very huge or significant Kannada speaking population. So the unions there, very ironically, is the BJP union. The BJP workers union, which actually Karmikara Sangha or something they call it. They are the leading union in BML. But interestingly, they all work together because, the common cause is not to let BML die. But yeah, the Kannada becomes more primary when the BML union protests or anything. In fact, the Kannada left, which is led by Samudaya, is very active in KGF. The Samudaya everywhere is now almost negligible. I think Tarakeshwar would also be knowing. But Samudaya is very, very active in KGF. They still do plays, revolutionary plays,
Really?
Yeah.
That's so interesting. Okay.
Yeah, so Samudaya is quite active in BML, and it's run entirely in the BML union, which is very Kannada union, so to say. Yeah. And there is also JDS union, which is part of the BML. Which becomes, so it's more led by the Kannada faces, so to say, in BML. But they all join forces together because of this common cause of losing jobs. Yeah. That way, I mean, those are the politics which are KGF is like a gold mine, if you want to. Socio-cultural, political, sort of so many threads to kind of pick from, in KGF is the only place where I found like strict Brahmins having the Mother Mary statue in their puja rooms. That is because she's called as the mining mother of minds there. So everybody has one mother of minds in their altar, whether they are Brahmin or non-Brahmin, which is crazy. Yeah.
Okay, Basav, just one more question, which is, sorry, that's my last really, because it's so interesting. So the other thing about KGF is the Cosmic Ray Research Station. Now, I don't know, you may be familiar with it, no? I don't know.
I mean, I just know where it is.
Then never mind, because I was just curious about that, because that's been there since the 50s, sir.
Yeah.
So that's interesting.
I mean, I couldn't get access to go inside, so that is the problem there. Some of even the Rock Mechanics Institute is there, National Institute of Rock Mechanics, but government is very protective of this. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks a lot. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. If there is no other response, I think it's quite late. So thank you, Basav, first of all, for suggesting your film and for giving us access to the film, so we could all really watch it. Since it was a 35-minute film, I thought generally we are used to watching feature films. For our discussions. So that's how I just asked Janaki if we could watch her film as well, and that's how this materialized. Thank you very much for staying for so long and patiently answering all our queries. And I really, look forward to also having you in future discussions. Thank everyone who has joined in on this discussion today. Hope to see you all next week, next Saturday at 9 p.m. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Baswa.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Good night.
Bye.
Bye. Good night. Bye.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night. Thank you so much. Lovely session.